All right, so pleasant good morning, everyone. Today we'll be continuing on the topic of the skeletal system. Last day we looked at the axial skeleton specifically, and today we'll be extending our knowledge to go to the appendicular skeleton. Axial skeleton, of course. What does the axial skeleton consist of from last day? It has, anybody remember, if we were to do just a revisit of the axial, what does it comprise? It goes down the center of the body. Yes,
So
Charles?
lumbar,
Right,
vertebrae,
so the vertebra is indeed part of it, right? What else?
skull,
The skull, right? Anything else?
The thoracic cage.
Pardon?
thoracic cage.
Oh, the
Yes.
thoracic cage, right. So coming down the center, skull, vertebra, thoracic cage, right? Anything else? In terms of the axial skeleton, right? So if we were to look, if we were to come down here, we'd see, as you rightly said, the skull, the vertebra, and the thoracic or rib cage.
You're sharing your screen? I don't think you are.
Oh, my bad. Right. So you'll see in the screen, yes?
Yes, sir. And someone
great.
said they waiting to get into the line.
Mm-hmm. So when we look at the axial skeleton, skull, vertebra, and rib cage, as quite rightly as Charles intimated, Charles, and who was it? Amina, who also mentioned it as well. So when we look at the skull, let's talk briefly around on the topic, the skull, right? The skull has this bone above the teeth. So you have two of them which begin with M, right? One is the mandible and one is the maxilla. Which one is the mandible? I'll give you a hint. Beard.
The one underneath, sir.
Right, very good, right? So the one underneath. So think about a beard, which men usually have. So therefore, in this case, this would be the mandible here, and above would be the maxilla. This bone that juts out, also known as the cheekbones, some of us have very prominent ones, some have more laid back ones. It's a long word, it begins with Z. It's the only Z word in the skull.
Zygomatic.
The zygomatic bone, yeah. So when you hear zygomatic bone, you know they're talking about your cheekbones, indeed. If you'll notice as well, hello, we have no nose. How it is, there's a space here, but if you look in a mirror and you touch, you see a nose. So what does that tell you? The nose, the nose is not comprised of bone, the nose as we know it, but it's comprised instead of what? It begins with C. We didn't look at it specifically.
Cartilage.
Cartilage. Thank you very much. Cartilage, yeah. Cartilage for the most part. Well, most of it, if you had to look at profile, you would see just the top of the bone, the nose up here, the first part is bone, but everything else is really cartilage. There's a surgery associated with the nose. What is that surgery called? I'll give you a hint. It's an African...
Rhinoplasty.
I didn't even myself had to go by African animal, right? So like a rhino, whenever you think about a rhino, the most prominent thing about a rhino is really, the nose, and it has a horn on top of it. So the same rhino referring to the nose of the animal with the horn. So rhino is referring to the nasal area. Rhinoplasty is a nose job. Right? So some persons do get nose jobs. It does become necessary medically in certain instances because some people actually have difficulty breathing, right? So rhinoplasty is indeed needed because of some bone defect, or in terms of a plastic surgeon performing it, of course, if you do have some head trauma, that would be needed then. These little holes here in your head, what are they called? I forget. Referring to planets circling or satellites. Yes, orbits, right? So these are your two orbits, your left and right orbit. And of course, they go to the back of the skull. And the region, what bone is found to the back of the skull? It could be related to a cow or an ox.
Occipital.
Right, so the occipital, what is the one on the top? Your dad. or the head of the household. So the top part of,
Parietal.
right, so parietal bone, right, to the top on either side. Of course, well, you should know this. Well, this is often referred to your temples, right? So your temporal bones on either side. And the one to the front is the easiest of the lot. It's called the
Frontal.
right, the frontal bone, right? So the frontal, temporal, parietal on top, and then to the back we have the occipital bone. This hyoid bone is not shown here. Can't really see it too clearly. Let me see if I can blow this up. Right. So when we're looking at the hyoid bone, what does that hyoid bone do? Because it's a really a strange bone. And if we were to just look at it, the hyoid bone. Well, it's not strange. I prefer to use the word unique. It's a unique bone, the hyoid. And this is probably the best way to see it. So it's, if you raise your neck, right, it's the only bone actually found in the neck, or the upper neck region, inferior to the mandible. Is the only bone found here. Other than that, you only have the cartilage associated with the trachea and of course the larynx. So this is the hyoid bone. And what do you think it does? So it's here. Let's see if we could get another image. Here it is here. What do you think it does? Just by looking at it, what does it do? What is this here? Let's have another look. So what is this here? Well, this is your trachea that runs in the back here. So what I'm trying to get at is the point of attachment for the cartilage associated with your larynx, right? It forms a point of attachment, and also for the muscles as well. Muscles associated with the digastric. The digastric muscle, it's a point of attachment to it, to the hyoid bone. So the hyoid bone, it's an unusual bone because it's U-shaped. It looks like a horseshoe, right? It's a U-shaped bone, and it's found in the region of the neck. But what it does, it really is points of attachment to structures associated with the trachea and your larynx. Also to the muscle, it also is points of attachment for muscles associated with the mandible. So it's a really a neat bone, and it's unique because you don't find any other bones in this area. The only other one is inferiorly located, of course, on your vertebral column. So speaking about the vertebral column, what are the divisions of the vertebral column again? I forget. It has something to do with your meals. So first of all, the vertebra, the divisions, what are they divided into? What are the first group of vertebra called? It begins with C.
Cervical.
Right, so you have your cervical. What's the next set?
Thoracic.
Thoracic. Right, so you have the cervical, you have the thoracic. What's the next set?
Lumbar.
Lumbar. Right, lumbar, just like where you get from Lal's Hardware. No, it's not the same lumbar. One is spelled with an E, this one is spelled with a E. Right, so cervical, thoracic, lumbar. What's the next set?
Sacral.
Sacral. And what's the last set?
Coccyx.
Coccyx or coccygeal, you'll see it. Right, so cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and coccyx. How would we remember those? So that's C, cervical, T, thoracic, lumbar. Could you think of a way we remember those 5 groups using the letters or mnemonic or something like that? Just like how we have unsliced RRM for the organ groups, organ systems. Anybody could think of a way we could remember then these vertebra, the groups? Okay, give that some thought. In terms of the division, how many do we have? So how many here? How many cervical? 7. Right, 7. Remember, we're looking at meal time. So breakfast is usually around 8. So we say early breakfast, so it's 7. Lunchtime. What time is lunchtime?
12.
12 o'clock. So we have 12, right? Thoracic, right? Lumbar. What time we'll have an afternoon snack?
5.
Or when Costard afternoon session is scheduled to finish, and it goes 2 to 5, so it's 5. That's when you go have your little afternoon snack. So 7, 12, 5, right? And the other two, coccygeal, coccyx, and the sacral comes first. How many are we sacral? Sacral. 5. Actually, lumbar here is sacral, and the coccygeal. These are fused as well. 5, 5, and 4. The last set is 4. So collectively, how many vertebrae do we have? 7, 12, 5, 5, 4.
33.
33, I know, let me see, my maths wasn't good. 7 and 12, 19 and 5, 24 and 5, 29 and 4, 33. Very good. So collectively, we have 33 vertebrae. And these are attached to our ribs. How many ribs do we have? How many pairs of ribs do we have? Let me rephrase the question.
12.
12,
Yes.
yeah, 12, 12. A nice way to remember it, if you're in doubt, in terms of the ribs, think about it. When you think about your ribs or ribs, it's a nice way. Ribs, you're thinking about barbecue, something to eat, and usually the biggest meal is usually around lunchtime. I don't know if that's too much information there, but you could think about it that way to remember that it's 12 ribs that you have. All right. And in terms of these ribs, they're divided up into 3 groupings. What are those groupings? The first set, true ribs. And the other one, of course, true and false, right? So you have the true ribs, the false rib, and these ones which are not attached, what are they called?
Floating ribs.
Floating, right? Floating ribs. And let's define them. Why are the true ribs called true ribs? Because they are attached via cartilage directly to the, what is this bone here?
Sternum.
Sternum. What is the normal name they give it, or people call it, the loose name? The
Breastbone.
Yeah, your breastbone. All right, so some of us might be familiar with this one. It goes right in the center there, and it forms the point of attachment to all of the ribs via cartilage, of course. Yeah, so this is your breastbone there. So true ribs are directly attached by a cartilage. What's the next set? With the false ribs. So why are they called false? Because they're not directly attached to the breastbone, but instead they're attached to the cartilage, which is attached to the breastbone from the others, right? So they piggybacking on the cartilage from the others, right? And then, of course, the false, are the false attached to the breastbone at all?
No,
Sternum?
No, sir.
No, right. So they're not attached at all. All right. And as we mentioned, in terms of the numbers, we have 7, 3, and 2. 7 and 3, 10 and 2, 12. That gives 12 pairs. I remember reading, this is totally unscientific, my opinion, my point of view. I never really followed it up, but that's one time when you're idle, they were talking about how Janet Jackson had her false ribs removed so that, she'll get a nice shape, a nice felt shape. I don't know how true is that. I never followed it up. And I'm not an orthopedic surgeon, so I don't know even if they perform such surgeries. But I found that interesting. Maybe if you do have the time, you could research it at your leisure. But I found it interesting, really, that you'd want to remove that. Very important to note, with all of those bones, even with the false bone, the floating ribs, they are attached to the vertebra in the back. So all your ribs, that is something common to all your ribs. All of the ribs are attached to your vertebra, but not all of them are attached to the sternum. That's very good there. Good. So here you have your vertebra. Now, there are 2 names given for the first 2 vertebra. So the first one that holds up the head and is associated with a story about a naughty man who actually did something naughty and the Greek gods punished him. Right, yeah. So Atlas vertebra, that's the first one, and the one that allows you to move your head, the so-called Mako.
Axis.
Right, the Mako vertebra, right, is the axis vertebra. It allows you to move your head left and right while keeping, looking forward. So very important to remember these 2, atlas and axis, and they're the only ones which are actually given names. So if you're looking on a X-ray, you would see this labeled as C1 and C2. referring, of course, to cervical vertebra number 1, cervical vertebra number 2. So if we are looking at the first lumbar vertebra, what would that be labeled on an X-ray?
L1.
L1, yeah. So that's exactly it. L1, you'd see it, L1. They wouldn't mark lumbar vertebra 1, number 1. No, you'll just see L1. And that would refer to the first lumbar vertebra. Okay? Where are the smallest bones in the body located? Very interesting. There's you always see this in trivia. Where the small, or
I
let me,
think it's in your air.
let me be very specific. Which one is the smallest? You're quite right. And there are 3 bones in there, the malleus, the incus, and the stirrup. All right, or stapes, malleus, incus, and stapes.
Yes, it's stapes that I know.
Which one is the smallest one?
I would assume the stapes because I heard that somewhere. I'm not too sure.
One way to find out, right? So that's all. That always, well, not always, but if a bit comes on trivia, I've seen it come in many different trivia. What is the smallest bone in the body? Strange as it might sound, is located in your ear, right? It's 1 out of the 3. And logically, let me see, there's one that hit the malleus, is the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. Yeah, it makes sense. The stapes make sense that is the smallest one. I think you're quite right. Because the hammer is, yeah, look at here. It looks that way. Look how small these bones are, G's and H's. Yeah. And I think you're quite right in terms of stating, yeah, the stapes. The stapes. So you're quite right. The stirrup is the little, so that's a little FYI, smallest bone in the body located in the ear itself. All right, let's go back to normal view. So the axial is the part skeleton that consists of the bones, the head, and the trunk. Right? It goes down the center or the axis, hence the reason that it is called the axial skeleton. So we mentioned what it is, the cranium, mentioned the jaw, the ossicles, which are the bones in your ear. We look at that towards the end of the semester in terms of hearing, the special senses. The hyoid bone, we mentioned that, the rib cage, and your vertebral column. All right, let's get on, have a look at the other one. The appendicular now. Now, what does the appendicular skeleton consist of? Well,
Your limbs and
right, your limbs or your appendages, right, which is your arms and your legs, and the 2 girdles, your shoulder or pectoral girdle, and your pelvic girdle here. Now we'd see this when we go on to the next topic, muscle. What muscle you think lies in front of the pectoral girdle? What muscle you think lies in front of the pectoral girdle? It's a something muscle and begins with P. You will laugh when you hear the answer. So what muscle lies in front of the pectoral girdle? It's a muscle that begins with P.
pectoral muscle.
Thank you very much. And I tell you would laugh when you hear. Yeah.
Oh, that's correct.
Yeah, yes, correct. The pectoral muscle, right? And that is the one for those of us who into bodybuilding and so on. For the men, that is the one, you know, that your pecs, that's the one right on the chest. And some bodybuilders, when they're flexing, you know, they dance the pecs, as it were. So it's only located on the chest, the pectoral muscles. All right, we look at those more when we get into muscles. So these bones, the pectoral girdle consists of 4 bones, the left and right clavicle and the scapula. The upper arms and forearms, so these are arms and forearms. So this is here. How do we know which one? One is the ulna, one is the radius. How do we know which one is the radius and which is the ulna? There's a very easy way.
So the radius was always in line
connected
with
to
the
the
top.
tongue.
Correct.
So, correct, very good. Yeah, thanks much. So the ulna runs in line with the pinky, as rightly say, and the ulna, radius, sorry, always goes with your thumb, right? So thumb, radius, pinky, ulna. Very good. All right, now you have your girdle, pelvic girdle, and we'd look at some proportions, in fact, and see, you know, how you could actually, when the pelvic girdle is found, they could tell if the remains were actually from a male or female in terms of forensic scientists or anthropologists, just by the arrangement of the girdle itself. Longest bone. Which one do you think is the longest bone in your body?
The femur.
The femur, right? The femur, right? And this is where your femur is. This one here is your femur.
Yeah.
Yeah, and proportionately,
Yes,
yeah, this is the longest bone, and it's a very strong bone. Yeah, so if it is you're grabbing a skeleton to beat somebody, you look to grab this bone. Okay, don't quote me on that one, but this is a very rigid bone because of the fact it holds up the weight from the upper portion of your body. All right, so a very strong bone. And I think I mentioned it to you that proportionately, you could tell the height of somebody based on the length of this bone. So you can reconstruct the height of somebody if you just find this bone alone. Because last day we were talking about it, in terms of measurements, a human is approximately how many heads long or tall?
I think
I think
you
you
said
said
7.
7.
Correct, just like the
Yeah.
week. It's incredible, you know, we are very proportionate. Anybody went home and tried doing it, like just sit down and watching people, you know, and using your thumb as a measure. So measure the length of the head and, you know, count 1, 2, come down their body then using that measure. Usually
So
you'll find,
my husband is 7.5.
or 7.5, you tried it out, there you go. Yeah, but it's usually around 7, 7.5. So if you find somebody like 5 or 3, well, you know, they'll be a little disproportionate, all right, in that regard. But you do have persons like that, either pituitary, well, the politically correct term is little people. I'm not sure. I want to say to the best of my knowledge, they still use, if they use the word dwarf in medicine, if they say pituitary dwarf or pituitary little person. I don't know. At least when to the best of my knowledge, pituitary dwarf, they call them, you know. So, but with them, you do have a disproportionality in terms of those measurements. It's not 7, is most definitely shorter. Okay. All right, so let's continue. Pectoral girdle, we mentioned that. Base of the hand, we have to get into that. Pectoral, that's the upper one. The pelvic, that is a very important one. The femur and the patella. So this is your patella here. Very important. It allows for the articulation of the bones. If you don't have them, it could be problematic. And then, of course, the phalanges located in the foot. So bones, for the cartilage, there's some different type of cartilage. We didn't have to look at this for the lab. Elastic, hyaline, and fibrous. Hyaline, just to take note, this is the most widespread of the lot, the hyaline cartilage. The fibrocartilage, it has lots of collagen fiber and it's great into tendons and ligament tissue. What's the difference between tendons and ligament? Anybody? One is bone to bone, one is bone to muscle. Somebody want to clear it up for me?
The tendon is bone to bone and the ligament is bone to muscle.
What you saying? Yeah. Bone to muscle is the, sorry, say that again, please.
I never mix it up. What
No,
is
no, say
tendon
it.
is bone to bone and the ligament is muscle to bone. Muscle to tendon or something. So I can't remember. I think I mixed it up.
Okay, simple. Which one is bone to bone?
The tendon.
Ligament.
Ligament. But
Leg, yeah.
bone to
Ligament,
bone.
leg.
And to me, I kid you not. You see, I had to stop as well. It could get very easily confused. And the one way I remember it, what's the name of the first of all, let me see if you only remember. The calf muscle, it has a name for it. NP.
So hypogastric.
No, you have part of it. Gas is the right part. When you think about your legs, because the legs carry you far. But when NP is the gastroc, I like how you're thinking gastroc.
Gastrocnemius.
Thank you very much. So that's how I put together things, yeah? So formulating the word itself, gastrocnemius muscle is your calf muscle. So the gastrocnemius, at the base of the gastrocnemius, you have a very important tendon. Which one is that one?
Achilles.
Right? And you know as well, anybody knows the story with Achilles? And again, relating to the Greek, there's a story with him. What's his story?
So all I remember is Troy because Brad Pitt acted it.
Oh, okay, okay. If if I remember correctly, he did something good. So what the gods did, they rewarded him by dipping him was it in the river Styx? So when they were dipping him in the river, where he would be virtually what's the word? Immortal means you
Immortal or
don't die.
semi-immortal.
Yeah, immortal. So nothing could kill him. They dipped him in the river, except where they held him, and where they held him was behind his ankle. So that was his 1 weak spot then. If you got to that, I want to say you'd kill him. So that's how they call it. Let me see. Achilles. Right?
In the movie, I think they an arrow. He was shot with an arrow
was shot,
on
and it
the
hit there.
ankle. Yes, somewhere around
Right.
there. Yeah.
That would make sense. So in Greek was a hero of the Trojan War. Right, blah blah blah. So that was his weak spot. Because they dipped him. Where is the story? Right. So here we go. That Achilles was invulnerable in all parts except by his heel, because his mother dipped him in the river Styx and she held him by one of his heels. So right in that area there, of course, and they call it now the Achilles tendon. So how I always remember it is, well, the Achilles tendon is attached to the gastrocnemius muscle. So therefore muscle linking with, and this now goes down to your calcaneus bone or your heel bone. So that's how I remember linking a muscle to a bone is therefore.
So can you just repeat that for me, please?
Sure. So down here, this is your calcaneus bone, your heel bone. Anybody went by a soup shop and say, give me a bowl of cow calcaneus soup?
That's
Cow
a
heel.
good one, sir.
Yeah, cow heel. But make sure you tell them after they put it out, hey, you call this cow calcaneus soup. Because, they might say, all right, I'm going to back and put a little sauce, and am I going back and spit in it and bring it back for you? If they're a little ticked off. All right. But this is your heel bone is your calcaneus bone. So just to remember then that the gastrocnemius is attached to the calcaneus via the Achilles tendon. So that's how I remember. Long story short, I remember muscle to bone is tendon. In the knee, however, you do have your ligaments. And I think, did I point it? Was it with this guy I was speaking about, the footballer from Liverpool?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right, Virgil van Dijk. Yeah. Right, so he had an ACL injury, and for the ACL, it was there, right? It was a rather innocuous challenge. He went in, ooh la la, and the goalkeeper, as you see here, he stretched out to get the ball. He was stretching for the ball. His leg went over. The back leg came around and twisted his leg, and he tore his ACL. So when we look at the ACL, if you would say AC, anterior cruciate ligament. Here we go. And this is it here. It's running bone, is connecting the bone to bone. So this is where this is what happened, like in Virgil van Dijk's case. It tore. Sorry. So they'll have this surgically going, I'm guessing, and I am not a orthopedic surgeon, but they would have to repair it mechanically by stitching it back. I am guessing. Right? But this is the one. When that one tears, oh yeah. You don't have much movement at all. And it's a very common one. And as I mentioned, women in particular, women football players, when they look at the numbers in college, so normalizing for, let's say, football teams in collegiate football in America, soccer as they call it, and they look at, let's say, 30 women's team from 30 particular universities compared with the male teams, what they found is that the incidence of ACL tears is greater with women than men. And again, as I mentioned, I think as well, has to do with the fact of the pelvis, the structural arrangement of the pelvis. And this is showing an ACL. This is it live, right? So there's the bone, and this is the ACL ligament here. I don't know if there's a good one. I can't see it here, but it's just showing you the ACL, right? Bone to bone is attaching that bone to the bone, ACL. All right, so long story short, ligament, ACL, the anterior cruciate ligament, bone to bone, Achilles tendon, muscle to bone. All right. But I do applaud your willingness to answer the question. I get confused all the time. So nothing to feel, embarrassed or anything about. It happens to all of us. Right? But just in terms of reinforcing the knowledge, it's just a good way to remember it. Just remember the ACL is in the knee, and the whole story with Achilles, and his little tendon there. Right? So it's a very strong one. Let's go back. Good. So in terms of that, the tendon, fibrous cartilage, right, is usually formed associated with tendon. All right. Oh, this is just speaking to the formation of bone, chondrification, also known as chondrogenesis. This word, you'll see it a lot in biology, genesis. In terms, and whenever I say it, it means like the birth or the starting up of. Right, so do take note of it. Anybody think of any words in biology where the word genesis is included? Okay, but do look out for them. You will see them in terms of appearing periodically. All right, let's go. Okay, bone. So when we're looking at bone, sometimes when we think about bone, we could be fooled. Fooled from the perspective, we think about bone as being this white skeleton and white. But in truth, in fact, bone is alive, right? It's alive. It's alive. It's a live tissue. And sometimes we forget that when we only think about this white representation, which oftentimes we see in the lab or on TV for whichever reason, right? But bone is really a live tissue, and it's a connective tissue that forms the rigid part of the bones that make up the skeleton, bone tissue. The bones of the body are an organ made up of bone, marrow, blood vessels, epithelium, and nerves. Right? Anybody here ever broke a bone in their bodies? Any significant, like an arm or a leg? I remember in my younger days, I was playing football, and I was a goalkeeper. And I went down to collect a ball, and somebody stepped on my hand, on my arm. Long story short, I broke my radius. No, ulnar. I'm now feeling it. I broke my ulnar, and the elbow spun around, and the nerve got stretched. And long story short, I had no feeling in my hand. I had surgery that happened on a Saturday. I went into the hospital on Sunday. I got discharged on Sunday. On Monday, I went to see an orthopedic specialist and arranged for surgery on Thursday to get the bone plated. So what they did, they went in, they drilled some holes in the bone, put in a plate to hold it, right? And yeah, so by Thursday, I was ready to go. So I didn't have a hard cast because it was held firmly. But the interesting thing was I had no sensation from my elbow to my small finger. It was gone. It was gone, the sensation. But I went to physiotherapy, and I always remember the physiotherapist telling me, don't worry, I'll come back. But I was like terrified. And that is when you start to make promises to Jesus, yes? That's when you start to know your Jesus very well, And bit by bit, the feeling came back. First, it came in the last one to come back was the index finger. Started to feel, sensation in my upper arm, and then the lower arm, and then eventually my hand. What was most interesting is that when I would go for physiotherapy, they would attach electrodes to the hand and stimulate the muscles electrically. So I'm seeing my hand moving, and imagine you're seeing your hand moving and you're not having any sensation whatsoever because I couldn't feel anything, right? And I'm just watching my hand moving, and it was just weird. But I applaud the physiotherapist I went to. It was two of them, and they always encouraged us, like, yeah. It took like about a month for it to come back. But what happens in a case like that? The nerve actually degenerates and then it regenerates. It's absolutely incredible. It regenerates and grows. So it grows back all along. How does it do it? It's fascinating. It grows back along where the degenerated nerve was. And boom, knock on wood, to this day, I have complete use of my left hand, didn't suffer any incapacitation whatsoever. And I'm really thankful for that. A year later, I went and I had the plate removed. So yes, they had to cut open my hand again. Not my hand, my forearm, and unscrew it. But when I dig up, I'll find one of these. I must find the X-rays. Let me see if I can find the X-rays to show you all. It's rather interesting to literally, when you look at the X-rays, you see the screws, through the bone. Anyhow, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Let's go forward. So the bone cells, very important to note, the osteoblasts, sites, and class. The osteoblasts involved in the creation, and the osteocytes and clast, they're involved in the reabsorption. Blast, creation, sites, and class involved in the reabsorption. How would we remember these? Because this is something which people forget very easily. Anybody? How would we remember blast, creation, class, reabsorption? Anybody have any? Go ahead.
B for building. So osteoblasts is building bones, right? Buildings. And osteocytes, I think, is the mature osteoblasts. And osteoclast is when you need to break down the bone to get like calcium and something else. So like class is like crushing, like breaking down. And blast building, and yeah, osteocytes, I think, is the mature osteoblast, I think.
Yes. All right, great. Thank you very much. Good. So we have one thing there that was mentioned by a colleague, blast in terms of building. When you think about it, a building, and then the class, those are the ones, reabsorption, and quite rightly right, in terms of if it is you do need calcium, it is released. So anybody else has a way of remembering it? Thank you very much for that contribution. Yeah. Anybody? I remember blast is for creation or building, and class is for reabsorption. So absorption, for just to link the words. Anybody can think of a way? Just like how we talk about the gastrocnemius, how your legs walk, and your car is like a gas truck because it has all the energy and it's storing all the gas. So that when you get the gas truck, then you can throw on the nemius to remember your calf muscle. Anybody?
I could only think of one for the osteoblast, right? So you know how some people think that all creation started with the Big Bang Theory. So blast of the Big Bang Theory would create creation, That's the only one I could think of. The one for the osteocytes, I'm not sure.
So if you're talking, we're not hearing you.
Oh, yeah. Better. Yeah, hello? Yeah?
We know
Yes,
hearing
we're
you.
hearing you now.
Okay. Yeah, I was having a conversation with myself. So, correct. Blast, Big Bang Theory. I like it, Big Bang Theory. So there was this big blast, and what happened out of the Big Bang Theory is you had the creation of the universe, right? So osteoblast, creation, and sites, well, we had to figure out, class. In terms of absorption, how can we relate the word class? Yeah, go ahead, Charles. Go ahead.
I can't help but to remember, like the white blood cells, the phagocytes, and so on, and they just eat and engulf. So it sort of goes with the reabsorbing, so to speak.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So the sites, yeah. So the sites in terms of blood, the phagocytes, those are the ones that eat, phagocytosis. So therefore reabsorption, you could relate it to that with the osteocytes, right? So, or another, you could just do it by elimination. If you do hit the blast, right, and you know which one the blast, Big Bang Theory creation, well, the other one that follows, which comes from C class, well, that has to be the reabsorption one, since one is, creation and the other one has to be reabsorption. Okay, great. So thanks for sharing that with us. So the type of bones, right? We have long bones, short bones, flat bones, sesamoid, and irregular. For the purpose of this course, the ones which we do have to pay attention to is the long bones. And the long bones are so-called because they are?
Long.
Yeah, they're long. Some things in life are not difficult. So you have the long bones, and as shown here, the long bones, the femur. Yeah, that's one of the principal long bones. And what happens in the long bone? Something known as hematopoiesis. Big word that means what?
Red cell production.
Correct is right, right? So within the bone, you have stem cells, and who knows, maybe stem cells are delicious, which is why we tend to eat chicken bones. How many people here, like when you eat your chicken bone, when you finish, you have like a little pyramid in the center of the plate, with just dust, a pyramid made out of dust, right? Because marrow is indeed delicious, right? It's a big thing in Europe as well. In fact, they would serve you, let's say, a bone from be it a cow or an ox, in section, and they bring it on the plate, and every special little fork for you to pull it out. If you watch the Food Channel, you'll see it, which is where I first saw it. I had no idea it existed, but they eat the marrow. And for those of us who chew chicken bones, you'll know that as well. It does have a unique flavor to it. So who knows, it's the stem cells that probably are delicious, could be that. Anyhow, so you do have the long bones. You have the sesamoid bone, which is an example, of course, is the patella, which is your kneecap. Then you have short bones, which are found in the carpals. And then you have flat bones and your satural bone. So this arrangement here, this is your lamnoid bone, lamnoid joint, and it's so-called because it looks like the Greek letter lambda, which is like an upside down Y. And one of the things we will see with babies, you do have the spacing of this joint, right, is a lot wider in babies and also to the front. And that it allows for the separation of the skull itself. And why do you think? So it's very soft. Some people will know it particularly to the top of the head. You have a big space and literally there's no bone there. Why do you think why is it important for a baby to have a soft skull at birth? Mind you, as we're well aware that the mole of the head, it closes up within about a month or so, month and a half. But why is it important at birth to have that big space in the head so that the head is soft?
So something about the maneuvering of the baby in the birth canal.
Yeah, correct is right. Coming through the vaginal passage. If that didn't occur, you'd have vaginal tearing. Oh, yes, you would. So that is why, it's have it like that. So the head, literally, it squishes to fit. And, when you think about it, the body is really it's really a machine. Imagine once birth occurs, exposure to oxygen concentration goes up, it then begins to harden. And what is another way to talk to the old people? What they'll tell you to get the mole of the baby head. How is guy to close? Why is rub on the baby head?
Coconut oil.
Coconut oil, yeah. And I don't think that's an old wives' tale. I've heard many people, including members, older persons from a family, my grandparents, it's a generational thing. And I've heard it from older persons from different families as well, So I've heard a wide cross-section of people attest to it, as well as my students over the years, that rubbing, coconut oil tends to close the mole of the head quicker. It helps in that regard, yeah? So, and everybody here know how to make coconut oil? A little side thing. Everybody know how to make it. Coconut oil is the easiest thing in the world. Let me hear you. Go ahead, let me hear you.
So it's either you blend it or you grating it is the better way.
Oh God,
To grate it and
as they say, grate.
to soak it and you squeeze out the milk is the better way.
You're bringing back memories when you say grate.
So the way I know it is that after you grate it, you heat the pot and throw the coconut, and it's when you start to burn, but it will spring the oil.
But before, right, so when you get the milk, what is how to do with it?
When you get the milk, you have to put it in the containers, well, a big
Mhm.
bowl, and you cover them and leave it overnight, and you scoop the cream at the top, and that is what you will be cooking on the stove.
You know, one thing I've learned, you're quite right, and I think both ways might work, even what Charles said, because if you do heat it, you know, it would come off, but it's easier if you do skim the cream. One thing I've learned, an easier way to separate the cream from the whatever you want, you know, the cream from the coconut, the grated coconut and water mixture, is to put it in the fridge. Anybody know about that technique? If you just put it in the fridge for like about a half hour or so, it separates, and literally it's hard because it's so rich in, you know, oils. So the top, the cream is hard, and you could just put your hand in and lift it out. Yeah. So you should give that a try next time. It's something I because similarly, you know, as I say, I knew about the other way, you know, in terms of taking a spoon and just skimming off the cream. But if you just take the bowl, you know, with the after you grate it or you blend it, you know, and you strain it, if you take that, put it in the fridge after about an hour, and just take it back out, the coconut actually forms a solid. You can just put your hand in and lift it out, and then put that in the pot. And then, of course, you heat it and it separates again into the oil, and the other crispy thing that is really smell nice. And then you just use your coconut oil. Good. Thanks for sharing. All right. So that's how you get coconut oil. Somebody tell me there's another cold press way. I have no idea of what it is. It has a way where you could actually do it without heating it, but I'm not too familiar with it. Let's go back to our long bones. So we mentioned this in lab yesterday, right? The epiphysis, diaphysis, and the other epiphysis. This is the shaft, and these are the ends. Let me ask you this question. Which part is softer? The shaft or the ends of the bone? So the epiphysis or the diaphysis, which one is softer, you think?
Epiphysis.
Well, for person, yes, for persons who are accustomed to, let's say, chicken bone, you'll know that, right? The end, yum, 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 and this part is crack, right? But it makes sense from a number perspective. Why do you think this is so? Why do you think this part is harder? For a simple reason. Why do you think this part is harder? Because it has to do what?
That's where the blood cell is produced in that harder part.
Partially, yeah, because you do have the marrow here, yeah. But why do you think it's hard, this part, and not up here?
For protection.
Yeah, for protection.
Bearing.
Correct. There you go. The weight. When you think about it, when the weight comes down, most of the weight actually is transferred to the middle part. So, and this part as well does have some quote unquote shock absorbing properties. Remember, this articulates with another bone up here. So, because it's soft and spongy, this spongy bone, and this is hard bone, the spongy has, you know, it gives a little bit of shock absorption to the end. But this one, diaphysis is, this is harder than this. So just a little FYI, this is compact bone, and this one is spongy bone. And yeah, and I, if ever you're in doubt, always think about, you know, when you're cracking a bone, a chicken bone, right? This is usually the part that you chew up really easily, and this one is harder. Okay, good. Right, so this just speaks to the other bones. All right. Compact bones, their structures as well. Let me ask a question. Osteoblast, osteoclast, which one creates Big Bang Theory?
Osteoblast.
Osteoblast, right? And what is the other one does?
Reabsorption.
Absorption, reabsorption, as the osteoclast, osteocytes. Very good. Just checking. So I guess it's good. It's glad it remains. What we are looking at here, it's black. We looked at a diagram yesterday, like, and I mentioned this is the only section that you'll see in a lab or as a lab diagram where it has black.
The osseous tissue.
Right, the osseous tissue, right? So we know anytime you see black in circles, you know, going on in a circle, I could think of no other arrangement. You know, from the time you see it, of course, it wouldn't be labeled, right? You know, it's bone, it's a bone sample you're looking at. From the time you see these little, you know, these little dots arranged in a circle, you know straight away you're looking at a bone, right? And that's the Haversian canal that runs in the bone itself. Right? So this, imagine, you know, this is what bone looks like. And we never think about bone like this, but this is a femur, the head of the femur. Right? It is alive, it has blood vessels, it has nerves. And I think some of us could identify with it. You know, for you know, when you get a good lash and you feel it all the way down to your bones, you have nerves running through there. And that is very important because it allows us or sensitizes us to the fact that something is going wrong. Right, so very important there. You know, on the topic of something going wrong, when I broke my hand, I always remember. So I wasn't even aware it was broken, but when it broke and I got up, and I just knew something was wrong. I just started to feel lightheaded right away, and I fell back down. Right, and well, the rest of the guys came. Obviously, something was wrong. They could have seen it. I couldn't. You know, my hand was twisted. And one smart person, he went and got the corner flag. And they broke it, and you know, he used it like a splint to tie around my arm. But on the way to the hospital, true story, I always remember one of my friends, and I thanked him later for it. He was talking to me, telling me one set of stupidness, all kind of things, and asking me questions. But the bottom line was he kept me awake, which was really important. I remember the time thinking, what kind of foolish questions you only asking me? But you know, he did keep me awake. And I remember this happened up in Port of Spain, so I went Port of Spain General. And even though it had a strike on, coincidentally, on that weekend, I always say this much, I got the bestest of treatment. They knew I was coming in, but they called them before, you know, to let them know, okay, you know, somebody with a broken arm coming in. I got the best of treatment at Port of Spain General. You know, when I went into casualty, even though they were on strike, I always remember that at the time. Now, mark you, this happened about 15 years ago. But I always, you know, remember that the excellent care that I got at Port of Spain General, even though the nurses and doctors were on strike, but they didn't mix matters with people coming into casualty. You know, they were very, very serious. I got immediate care and I was warded after that. Okay, so let's go. Right, so that's bone and bone. Okay. That's one more, and then we look at some questions. All right, so bone, this fetal development, in terms, there's not any syllabus in terms of development of bone at the fetal stage. I think we're too blown up here. Yeah, let me bring it back down. Okay, so in terms of, we mentioned this, that, you know, this is the spongy bone, and it does have shock absorptive properties to the tip of the bone. Then you have the shaft of the bone. Right, this is compact bone here, so very important to take notes of those two. Right, the osteoblasts. Right, we mentioned the role of those osteoblasts and the osteoclasts. Right, bone create, and the class take away. Now they absorb. Why would you need to absorb bone? Now I'll draw reference as well to my fracture of my ulna. You know, oftentimes when you think about a bone, so the bone broke, so they did set it back, and I mentioned they put a plate. So what happened? Think about it like you're taking tape and you're wrapping it around the break. That's how actually bone is laid down when you do have a break. So so literally there was like a bump over the bone. You can imagine that. So the osteoclasts come in and they begin to like shave off the bone, to shave off the excess bone that is actually formed. So that's why they say, you know, that's their job. After this lays down the bone, this one comes and it shaves it off to make, which is, when you think about it, that is absolutely fascinating. And again, it just points to just the remarkable machine that your body is. All right, they're just talking about transforming growth factor beta, TGF beta, and IGF insulin-like growth factors. These are just hormones which cause this to happen. These are proteins, right? TGF beta and IGF. Yeah. Right, so here it is, we're looking at, talk to me about this one. What type of, you know, what bone is this one here, you think? Let me hear you. Which bone is this one?
The humerus.
Humerus, yeah.
Humerus.
Yeah, right, a humeral factor. That's what we're looking at here. Correct. And there's a bit of bone that got chipped up here. Yeah, we're seeing some tearing here, tissue tearing, lacerations. All right. What does this L mean, by the way?
Left.
Yeah, so it's left. Very important to know which side, left and right side. So it's the left. What this one is showing. Right.
Pins.
Yeah, there's pins. So close reduction and pinning. So there's similar surgery I had, to where they drill in and they put the pins in to hold the bone in place. So this look like the fracture is healing across here. So they pinned it in this regard. Yeah, but mine was down here. So not only was it like this, but it had a plate. So just imagine a plate they put in. I never was steel or titanium, but the plate was over here. They drill holes and they put the screws in because the bone was broken. So it was separated. Put the plate, drill, screw. Rather interesting. I also remember Dr. Toby did the surgery. All right, let's look at the MCQs and then we'll call that a day. All right. Still processing that video. YouTube movie. 95% completed. The video from yesterday, it's still processing. It's attendees. No, I'm not. This is absolutely incredible. Okay. Let's see, osteoblasts, osteocytes, the osteoclasts.
So when I see your screen,
Thank you. I didn't share. Share screen. Screen one. Share. Okay, great. Here we go. Let's look at them. Question one. We would have seen some of these questions before, but it would be like a bit of revision. So all red bloods are produced in the spleen. We know that is not true, right? So a good bit of them are formed in the bone marrow. That's why it's and we mentioned as well the role of erythropoietin or EPO. It's a hormone which is also secreted when you go to a very high elevation. So if you go to a very tall mountain top, your body recognizes, sensors in your body detect that your oxygen levels are low. So it causes the secretion of erythropoietin from the kidneys. Erythropoietin is detected at the level of the bone marrow, causing hematopoiesis or stimulating the stem cells present in the bone marrow to actually produce more red blood cells. So having more red blood cells mean that in a limited amount of oxygen, the probability of you getting more oxygen is increased because you just have more red blood cells to take in the little bit that is coming in, right? So that is false. Yellow bone marrow, this is primarily for Which one is it?
Fat storage.
Right, yellow bone marrow, right? Some of us might be familiar with it, and it's primarily for that, yeah. So yellow bone marrow for fat storage, that is what is used for. Bones are held in place by muscles. Aha, true or false?
False.
False. Right, so bone to bone is what again? In your knee, think about your knee.
Ligament.
Right, your ACL, right? So anterior cruciate ligament. So think about my good friend Virgil van Dijk, the football. Anyhow, just think about footballers, right? Or persons who play sport and they rupture their knee. And when you think about the knee, when you really feel your knee, it's only really bone around there. So bone to bone is ligament, and then of course tendon. Think about our good friend Achilles and the gastrocnemius muscle down at the bottom. Yeah. Okay, just give me 1 minute, coming. Yeah. Okay. So so bones are held in place, right? Not by muscles, that's false. But in the knee, bone to bone, right? You have your ligament, bone to tendon, uh, muscle to tendon, and then tendon to bone. That is muscle to bone is tendon. Yes. Next one. What are most often attached muscles to a joint? So I just just answer that one. Right, so muscle to bone, that's a tendon. That'd be a tendon in that case. The spaces in spongy bone are often filled with red bone marrow. And what this produces, we didn't speak to that, but the red bone marrow, well, actually we did. In terms of, that's where you get the stem cells. So what do they produce? The red stem cell. Well, the stem cells, which are found in red bone marrow, what will they produce?
Blood cells, sir.
Yeah, blood cells. All right, we go over there. Osteocytes, number 7, osteocytes. These are found in osteons. And osteocytes, the osteocytes are found in the osteons. Osteocytes are found in the osteons. I just repeated, yeah? Repeat the question, okay? Cells that break down bone are called osteocytes, true or false?
False.
False, right? So the osteoclasts, those are the ones that break down, right? The function of an osteoclast, number 10, remove one cells and well, just into that. That's what it does. The production of new bone is dependent on the growth of the
Osteoblasts.
osteoblast. Thank you. Creation, you know, as your colleague quite rightly told us. The thickness of a bone never changes once a person is fully grown. Is that true or false? Well, that's false because you do have remodeling of bone that occurs throughout your life. So it does change. All right, let's get on to ones which we refer to today. So the axial skeleton lies where the axial.
Midline of the body.
Yeah, it goes down the axis or the central axis. So the axial skeleton lies in the midline of the body, comes down the middle. Skeletal muscles are attached to the skeleton, and what do they function to do? Do they support? Do the muscles actually support the body? When you think about it, the muscles help you support your body. Those of us who do,
They allow
yeah, they do. Do they make the bones move? Together with which two other organ systems do they help in making the body move? So the bones, the muscles, and which one?
Nervous.
Nervous system. Excellent. Yeah, those are the three that bring about movement. In terms of muscles, do they help to maintain release? Do they release heat? When you exercise, how do you usually feel? Cold or particularly warm? Yeah, that's one of the byproducts. All right. And do the muscles protect the organs? Notwithstanding, yeah. So the answer, well, of course, once you get two, right? That is so. Number 15, the axial skeleton consists of, what does it consist of? The axial coming down the middle. Talk to me.
The skull, the rib, the vertebral column, the hyoid. See?
Right, hyoid. And what's the hyoid bone again? Where would you find that? What shape? Yeah, it's shaped like a U, right? And that's the one that attaches to the trachea, and muscles associated with the mandible, they're attached to it. So it's a point of attachment, forms the point of attachment. And as well, what it does, it holds the trachea open. So the trachea also attaches to it. Now we do have to look at 16. 17. In newborns, certain cranial bones are not completely formed, and instead they form membranous regions, which are known as the mole of the head. What's the other name for the mole? It have another name?
Fontanelles.
The fontanelles, yeah. Right, fontanelles. And as we mentioned, usually about month and a half, it begins to solidify. 18, the frontal, parietal, and occipital bones are bones that form the what?
Skull.
skull.
Yeah, you find all of them. Where would you find the occipital?
The
The
back of
back.
the head.
Yeah, right. So always remember cow tail. That's the occipital bone. Ox, it sounds like an ox, which is like a cow. Cows have tails, and right, so it's the skull. The jaw consists of which two?
B.
B.
Mandible and maxilla.
Which one is below?
Mandible.
Mandible, right. Yeah, the maxilla is the one on top. Very easy. No, listen. You're probably saying, oh, so this is so, easy to remember. But when you're under pressure, it's a different story. So it's always good then to have a backup plan, in terms of memory, jarring your memory. The vertebral column extends from the skull down to where? So what's the end of it? It goes all the way down to the
Pelvis.
to the pelvis, right? Does the spinal cord, does it go all the way down the vertebral column? Where does it stop? Let me see if somebody remember it. L, at which level? L what? Which number? Which number?
Two. L2.
And interestingly enough, the diagram was showing L2, but to me they were saying L1. Yeah? Let's have a look. Well, L1, L2, okay. The spinal cord ends at L2. I tip my hat to you. L1, L2, yeah, so it is L2. That's what I was saying. But to me, I was doing some research, and I was seeing some that said L1, but logically, I was looking at it and saying, this looks like L2, right? So it does at birth L3, the lower limit. Or this is probably where it's L1 or L2. So it could be either one. So either one you mentioned, so it stops there. And then you do have nerve extensions from it, but the cord of itself stops there, L1, L2. And then you have the extension occurring via those nerves. Most critically, this one here, coccygeal nerve, goes all the way back, coccyx. And always remember, I remember when I was in primary school, I don't know how many people can identify with it. It was always a joke to pull away the chair. Like if somebody's standing, use your foot and pull away the chair and let the person fall on the ground. Anybody know about that?
Yes, sir.
Right. It's very dangerous.
Very.
And I remember one of my students actually told me that happened to her when she was 14. She was now 33 and she still gets pain. She got her coccyx damaged and by extension nerve, and she still has nerve pain to this day. So all that being said, even though, it's funny, but think about it and don't pull away people's chair from them. Let's go forward. Normally the vertebral column is not straight, but has how many curvatures? We didn't mention this. How many curves does it have? 1, 2, is it 3? Could you say 1, 2, 3? How many curves does it have? It comes back in. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, and it actually curves here down to the bottom as well. 4. Let's see. I want to say 4.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4. It curves back, yeah. So I want to say it usually has 4 curves. Right, in terms of it's not straight, but it's curved all the time. Anybody has any idea why is it curved? Why do you think it's curved and not straight?
Flexibility.
Flexibility, yeah. It helps with flexibility, yeah. Anybody here does yoga or gym and so on? It does help, to bend and so on. So the flexibility, definitely because of those curves. If it was straight, it would be a little problematic, especially for movement. It'll be very tricky. Intervertebral discs. We have 6 more to do and then that'll be it. Located between the vertebra, allow motion between the vertebra so that we can bend. Is that true? Those little discs.
I'm going to say true, sir.
Yes,
Sir, but I'm not okay.
Yeah. If you didn't have those intervertebral discs, what would happen with the vertebra? Right, so as the name implies, the intervertebral discs, they're placed between the vertebra.
Would it cause friction, sir, if you don't have that?
Correct is right. And could you imagine bone rubbing on bone in your vertebra? What does that translate to? A word that begins with P, 4 letters and rhymes with rain.
Pain.
You could just imagine bone on bone. Oh, woo. Right, so here are your intervertebral discs, right, shown here, and they most definitely, right, it prevents bone on bone rubbing. Right, so
There's a surgery where they inject, if it's worn out or something like that, they inject fluid or some sort like that.
It'll be rather interesting. I do know about that. Yes, in terms of injecting. I wonder whatever they inject. I'm studying. They do all kind of things actually with your bones, particularly your vertebrae as they get older. I remember meeting an older man and he was telling me, I didn't get to the specifics of it, but he was like, look, they took coral and they put it in his back, literally coral. Well, clearly, of course, I'm sure they sanitized it and so on. But he was like, yeah, he has coral in his back. So, and again, too, maybe he was starting to get some bone wear down, but they could put coral, if you could imagine, into your back. I was like, whoa. So all that being said, just be careful with your back. But I do know of the surgery in terms of injecting that liquid. But all of that is still, that would be at the level of the intervertebral discs. Yeah. Okay, let's continue. All ribs connect directly to the lumbar vertebra. True? False.
False.
We didn't look at it, but that would be interesting, We didn't look at that at all. That's interesting. Where do the ribs attach to? Rib articulation with the vertebra. That's interesting. What is it? How are ribs attached to the vertebra? Where do they go? What ribs? Each rib with the two thoracic. Nah, no need there. Let's have a look at these. This one. Yeah, so here it is. So this is like this diagram, very nice, right? So it's showing the articulation of the ribs, and it goes where in terms of rib 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, down to the level of T12. So they're all attached to the thoracic vertebra, yeah? So it's the thoracic they're attached to, not the lumbar. So we good?
Yes,
Everybody clear on
Yes,
that?
sir.
Right,
Yes,
so do
sir.
12
remember,
thoracic and 12 ribs.
there you go. So maybe, do you think that is why you have 12 ribs? Because you have 12 vertebra? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know. Very interesting. But yes, 12 vertebra, 12 ribs. So another way of remembering it, note that you know, all the ribs, they are attached uniquely to one of the vertebra. And once you remember, you know, lunge, 12 ribs after the 7 cervical. So you could identify then that yes, you have 12 ribs because you have 12 vertebra. Yep, we good? Let's go. So 3 more. 2 pairs of floating ribs are so-called because they are not attached to any other bone, but are freely embedded in muscles. That true?
That's false.
That is false, yeah. Because even though they are attached, they don't just float.
Attached to the vertebra.
Correct. And if I were to ask you what vertebra are they attached to, the 2 floating ribs, give me a letter and give me a number. Which ones are they attached to?
T11 and T12.
There you go, T11 and T12, very good. All right, 2 more. Which of the following is not in the appendicular skeleton? We kind of were just talking about it. It's more in the axial. We were just talking about axial. So which
So
one
the
is
coccyx.
right? Right. And the coccyx is part of what structure in the axial? Is you in fact you told me at the top of class what it is when you're looking at the axial. So what parts of the skeleton make up the axial? The skull, the rib
The
cage,
skull.
and the
Pelvis.
vertebra. Yeah.
Oh,
So the part that is not part. So we're looking at the which of the following is not in the appendicular skeleton. This is part of the axial skeleton. So the rest are part of the appendicular. The components of what are linkly loose by ligaments rather than firm joints. We didn't specifically look like that, mention it, but it's pectoral girdle. All right, that is not actually on the syllabus. Let's look at 27. So we're stopping at 30. What is a term that refers to either fingers or toes? If I were to tell you,
Phalanges.
or if phalanges would be true, but it's not an option, yeah, but it would be true.
The digits.
Thank you, yes, the digits, either fingers or toes, they're known as digits. Carpals, where would we find carpals specifically? Well,
So that's the wrist.
yeah. Yeah. So the carpals, they're found specifically, right? The bones here. Do we have, if we were to look at the foot. So what are the equivalent of the carpals in the foot?
the tassels.
So the carpals, yeah. Actually, right, these are what good. The tarsals, right? So we have the tarsals, metatarsal, and the phalanges at the end, but collectively these are known as digits, and we have digits in both the hand and leg, hand and the foot itself. Good. The arm twists because the radius and the ulna are always parallel to each other. Is that true? Look, try it out on yourself. Are they always parallel, or does one move over the other one?
One moves over the other.
So I want
Yeah.
to say true, but I don't know.
It moves. One moves, and it, unfortunately, it would be best if you had X-ray vision, right? But actually, one moves over the other. So maybe the best thing to do is to feel the bone. But if you realize at the level when you're looking, if you feel down by your elbow, you don't get the movement. But higher up by the wrist, one moves over the other one. It moves. So this one isn't true. And as I said, it'd be best if we had, unfortunately, we did to look at it from a skeleton. The bone that leads out to the thumb is positioned so the thumb can reach out and touch the other digits. Which one is that? So and that would be the meta. Well, since it's the hand, it's the carpal. And the last question for today, the bones of the arm. Ooh. So the arm, what are the bones of the arm?
Humerus, ulnar, and radius.
Thank you. Yeah, humerus, which is the longer bone from the shoulder or the scapula, and the ulnar and the radius, which are your forearm bones. Good. All right. So today what we did in terms of, we revisited the axial skeleton, and then we moved on to the appendicular skeleton. We also mentioned in terms of osteoblasts and class, in terms of their function, how to differentiate between the two. And then we had a look at some of the cartilage, and also differentiated in terms of the differences between ligaments and tendons. So a way we used to remember the differences between them, we looked at the story of Achilles, right? And Achilles and the tendon. And then we mentioned the footballer Virgil van Dijk and the ACL. So injuries to the knee. One way to always remember, injuries to the knee that is very common with footballers is the ACL, right? The ACL injury, and that is the one in the knee. And so therefore ligaments are associated with that joining of bone to bone. Axial skeleton consists, we did mention, of the two girdles, pelvic, pectoral, and the appendages, namely the arms and the legs. All right. Any questions anybody have? Nope. All right.